Welcome to the 11th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens, and today we'll be speaking with Ryan Orr, former student and business analyst slash consultant slash some kind of business tech nerd. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about this a few months ago, right? You came back and visited and were hanging out and we talked, and that was right when I was starting the podcast.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And you were, somewhat enthusiastic, and so I roped you in. But in the time between the first discussion and now, you're on the verge of launching a website. So let's start there, because I don't know if we'll get back to it once we talk specifically about school. But,
yeah.
So what's the website, and what are you doing there?
Yeah, so the website's called Drop Dead Premed, and I am kind of launching a alumni-to-peer or peer-to-peer mentoring service, which, I mean, right now is entirely just volunteer oriented, and it's primarily aimed at students in high school or college that are considering going down the pre-med track or already on the pre-med track. So I was one of those students at that time, literally up until the last year that I graduated college, and you hit a lot of bumps on that road. But in the end, I didn't go to medical school, and in the end, I am pretty happy with how I ended up, and I have a lot to say about that to students who are considering or already on that path. Yeah.
So when you say, obviously your personal experience factors in, but when you think about consulting, advising, doing some sort of mentorship, is there a need for that? Like, do you wish that someone, like what you're doing, obviously you see value in. So my question is, do other people need this? Or and if they do they know they need it? Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely. I would say there is a lot of talk around people who are in that audience that they're always trying to figure out and trying to better understand where they're going on that track. And oftentimes you mostly talk to your friends, or you talk to professionals in the field. And then as a supplementary service, you go to a school counseling office, or more specifically the pre-med counseling office. There's always a designated counselor or a group of counselors that
is that available for people who aren't specifically pre-med? A lot of schools are getting away from pre-med. So you do bio, you do other things.
That's right.
Is that open to everyone?
It is open to everyone. So it could be, it's just kind of from what I've gone through, it's kind of you sign up for, you find an appointment, you can talk about anything you want, but that person, that counselor is there for pre-med stuff.
Right.
They know the requirements, they know med school things, and that's it. That's their bucket.
Right. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so in your experience, is that in some way insufficient or biased or?
Yeah, both. So it's, speaking to the first point, insufficient. So pre-med counselors can speak to medical school and can answer the questions that you may have about going to medical school. But oftentimes when you're a student going to see a counselor, you're trying to figure out whether something went wrong, or whether you're having doubts on something, or whether you're trying to expand your horizons, expand the trajectory in which you might be headed.
Right.
And pre-med counselors can give you you don't want to go to med school, you can go to a master's program or a PhD program, and then essentially carry you from there, is on your own.
Right.
They are there to speak to what medical schools do, and that's it.
So to use a train metaphor, they can help you switch the track, but after that you're on your own.
Absolutely.
We've got nothing to do with that track.
Right. And that's totally discouraging as a student, because you're I just invested so much into pre-med, or into it becomes part of your identity to a certain extent down this path, and now I'm I don't want to do that anymore, or I don't know that that's right for me.
Right.
Can I do business stuff? Can I do computer science stuff? And they're well, go ask a computer science counselor or professor. We don't know.
Right. And so you're ideally going to try to sort of fill that gap. You sort of, for anyone who's going to continue on the pre-med path, they have those people. Not that it would hurt to ever get, say, an outside opinion, and that's maybe the bias issue. But if a person was going to switch, you're sort of left in a void. You're operating in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking you and people you know can sort of fill in that gap a little bit to help other students.
Right.
Or younger students.
Exactly. I mean, I went through that track and ended up going into consulting and like just business technology stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's as ambiguous as that. Like it can be anything like that. But I have friends who are in finance now that were pre-med students and people who have switched over to like policy side in healthcare. Like you can stay in that domain and do a multitude of different things. But I like to say that a majority of pre-meds don't become doctors. And there's like a huge audience of like potential mentors that can speak to their own path and where they've gone and how they got there. In reality, of the people who end up going down pre-med, I would love to see a statistic of how many of them actually become doctors, because from like all the the affecting of pre-med students to other fields is like the attrition just so high. Right.
Well, that was going to be my next question is there a number, like I'm sure that number exists, but whether it's there nationally or just school by school. And any school that has a high number, they're not going to release it anyway, right?
No.
They're never going to tell you, hey, come here and study, go pre-med, study bio, and we'll change your mind. Like, they're never going to tell you that.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you think that data has to exist somewhere.
I know it's been targeted to underrepresented demographics. Mm-hmm. It's like these many people who are like of racial minorities or sexual minorities were going to become doctors,
right?
And then like 60% of them by their second year said, "I don't want to do that anymore."
Right.
Like I know there's some research on that regard because that's a big part of like the medical community is like why do we have so many white male doctors? How has that been shifting over the years?
Right.
But aside from that, just more broadly from a school or from like a degree perspective, like it's broadly.
Yeah, unknown. And I never thought about that, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was tutoring a student on college admissions essays, and really, really smart guy, and he was applying all over the place. But I was helping him with an essay to Yale, and he was declaring double major. He was applying to be a double major, like bio, pre-med, and theater. Yeah. And he was good in theater and it was funny, he's outgoing, but one of the things that he was trying to do in the essays, because one of the questions was something about why did you choose this program or why would you do what you want to do?
Yeah.
And he's trying to connect like just a genuine love of theater, but the reality that he's probably never going to make any money, and he's a smart guy anyway, and his care for people, his interest in medicine and biology and the rest. And part of the essay then becomes as a upper middle class or upper class white male, what this looks like. Mm-hmm. But then as a gay man, where he stands, and he had statistics about underrepresentation of gay men in the medical field, and so he's trying to like pack all this into, I forget, like a 500-word essay, and so my job is really just like, wow, you've got plenty to work with, we've got to trim this down. But one of the things that he was very serious about was talking about why he individually it was important to him to get into medicine, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if he's actually, I think he's still sticking with it.
Okay, great, yeah.
But because he has so many interests, and theater was one, and he does have some business interests, I never said it to him. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, this is a guy he hits organic chemistry and he's out.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, that's how you figure out more about yourself. It's like through failure and like through shooting out in one direction and only to get bounced back in the other direction.
Yeah, and that, and I'm sure he'd make a great doctor, but, and I'm not doubting that he would do it. I just think that, when you don't, a lot of people have sort of tunnel vision on what they want to do, especially if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, or I wouldn't even say all of engineering, like a few, like computer scientists are always going to be computer scientists.
Yeah.
And you sort of focus, but everybody else who has either, I don't know what I'm into, or I'm into a lot of different things, I think it's probably hard to get through some of those majors and some of those programs, because every time you hit the bump in the road, you think, there's 5 other things I like that I'm good at, and that becomes a temptation. Mm-hmm. For you, what changed your mind? Like, you obviously, you're thinking, I don't know about medical school, I'm trying to figure it out. What was the thing that either made you question it, or maybe that made you just finally say, that's it, I'm not doing it, or I'm going to wait? What changed your thinking?
Yeah, I think when I found myself trying to study for the MCAT, in like my third year of college. I sat down, I got the books, I was like ready to prep and ready to go. And I think I tried to like put my nose to the grindstone for 2 solid weeks. And I made like abysmal progress. I tried, and like I was reading it, and then I'm like, I am going to take the MCAT in like 2 months from now. And there's like 6 books that you, like 4 or 6 books that you have to look through. I'm a quarter of the way through the social sciences section. And I'm like, like I can't, at this pace, I couldn't make up the other content that I was missing or like falling behind on. I was like, well, I just can't do it. What was holding me back, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just working slow. It's I hated every second of it. Right. So it was like I was reading about the social sciences stuff. I'm like just writing down facts and making flashcards. And I'm like, this is fine. But like what you just said, it's like I would much rather be doing X, Y, and Z. Right. And I was doing an internship at that time too, and I was just like that like stuff which isn't necessarily like medical related was interesting to me. It was like something that I was more enthusiastic about doing, and like that was a totally different thing too than what I'm doing even now. But that was the turning point for me. It was like,
so when you're actually like, it's time to take the test and prep, and I mean I know some people who take time off of school to do it, or you know, they'll finish undergrad, take basically a gap year before, you know, just to prep for the test. For you, as you're having, say, trouble studying or, you know, wanting to study, at that point, was it that you didn't want to study that stuff, or was it the idea that you didn't want to be a doctor? I think, like, you know, I would have loved to go to law school, but I don't think I'd want to be a lawyer. So I don't know, why would I'd never pay off the loan. Right. But I think sometimes people are in the opposite camp where they want to do the thing and don't want to go to school for it. Is it the idea of the studying, or was it you just sort of lost your motivation in medicine in general? Like, was it the field was less interesting, or
no? I think the field was definitely like, and still healthcare as a whole is a huge of interest of mine. Like I've never wanted to step out of that space. Like I've had my work right now, like in business and technology, is healthcare driven. Like there's no part of my day where I'm not thinking about a patient or a consumer who's like under like some healthcare branch that I work on. But in the context of that, I never lost my passion, but I knew that my passions weren't providing medical care to someone. So I would be much more happier still having an impact in the healthcare space, that impact being like improving healthcare quality for someone, or improving like coverage for individuals.
Something more almost like infrastructure.
And I like to note, like I did study the hard science, like I majored in biology, but I also majored in public health. And in that public health space, like I saw so much more like soft applications of healthcare that weren't like clinically driven or research driven, that I was just like, this is as an individual, you can have so much more impact in this space. And it's not necessary to know like the nitty gritty details of like what this protein does in this cell and things like that. And while I appreciate all of that detail and content, I can appreciate it. So
you feel slightly less passionate, and you know,
and it took like 4 years of study to get to those details, and I'm like, it was just like, I don't want 4 more years of more detail.
So I mean, and obviously we're talking about both complicated science and complicated studies. The fact that the MCAT is such a difficult test and requires so much preparation, does that, and I mean, obviously I'm not arguing that we want just anybody to be a doctor, you know, I mean, we want smart and responsible people and people with the knowledge and the rest. Is the test, does it feel that difficult because college isn't preparing you for it well? Or is it the test is like too hard? Or there's just so much stuff, like the entire thing is fair and it's just very, very difficult. Like I don't know, I've never done any of this, but you know, sometimes people complain about a certain test and it starts looking like, well, your school didn't prepare you. Or school prepared you, but you suck. Or you know, or it's just, well, it's just hard. You know, like how does that break down?
I would say by and large, it is just a hard test. In addition to like the detail that can be asked of you to provide in that test, it's just so much content. And 10 years ago to now, it's expanded content. Like
Right.
psychology and sociology weren't components of that test, or weren't like critical components of that test
Right.
before, and now they're like standalone sections of that test.
Right.
So you've gone from making the test longer and making the content like almost adding a third more content. So you've done, from a medical provider perspective, you've increased, like in a country where we're already short tens of thousands of doctors.
That's where I was going
Yeah.
with this is, are we really serving anyone, the students or the patients or society as a whole?
No.
If it's that difficult to become a doctor.
Right.
Again, not suggesting that we necessarily lower the bar, but
Yeah.
we have a shortage. And you
Right.
see more and more people, and I don't want to say a name, but someone that I think I think you went to high school, you may have been in the same grade, someone else who graduated wanted to be a doctor, and I believe now is pursuing the certification to be a physician's assistant.
Yeah.
Still get to, now you're working with patients and you're doing all the rest,
Right.
but you also got to bypass some of the more painful parts of becoming a doctor.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I feel like I hear more and more people doing that. But if that's where everyone's going, then do we still need medical school in the way it stands? Or do we
Right.
need those gates, those tests
Yeah.
that function that way?
I think, like we're talking about the MCAT, and that's an entrance exam.
Right,
And
right.
you're entering a field where you are certified and tested down the line for the rest of your career.
Right.
And depending on if you specialize, or if you're like what kind of practice you have, you could go through even more what state you're in. You could go through more regulation and barriers for that to provide a service. But we're talking about the entrance exam, and it is like an extremely hard test.
Yeah.
There is 4 years of schooling minimum after that point, and for people who end up going to get their MD. And from a public health standpoint, I would want to funnel in as many people as I can accommodate to become doctors. And then if someone decides along the line that they don't want to go to medical school or become a doctor at that point,
Right.
and they're in medical school and able to make that decision, as opposed to being weeded out even before entering at all, then I would think that would be a more informed decision at all, in general anyway. But to your point of like, do we need all of these checks? Obviously, quality is great. We have great healthcare providers in the United States. Do we need that level? I don't know. Like, there's plenty of other countries that are poorer than the United States, and I use that from like a GDP standpoint
Right.
and things like that. But and they have equivalent, if not better, healthcare coverage or healthcare providers
Right.
in that country. And there's definitely like stronger leaders from an international perspective than the United States.
Right.
I think a focus that my public health curriculum focused on was like Cuba. Like, they did a lot of work during, I think, the Ebola crisis, or not the Ebola, the
Zika.
Yeah, the Zika outbreak. Like, they were like on the ground, and to become a doctor I'm using Cuba as an example, but just like to become a doctor generally from an international perspective, you don't have 4 years of undergraduate and then 4 years of medical school.
Right.
That's just not the case. So
Yeah.
it's more expensive for someone in the United States to become a doctor, and then that's a real hurdle.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, the money, the time, and I think for a lot of people, the time is a bigger deal. I mean, probably my best college professor, my favorite college professor, talked me out of becoming a college professor. He was the guy. I was already doing the education stuff just to have something to do, and it's an extra year to get a master's degree, and it was great. But I said I think that's what I want to do, and my GRE score was good, but my subject area GRE was not that great. I mean, it was okay. I was like very average, but it's all British literature. I was like,
Right.
I do American Lit. And he's like,
Right.
well, tough luck. That's the test. He goes, you could go to these schools. And there were still some very good
Right.
schools on the list.
Right.
But I thought, why would, what? And he goes, think of it this way. If you pursue this, you got to do it because you love it, because you're going to be about 30 years old. Mm-hmm. And you're essentially just going to be starting out.
Right.
You're going to be late 20s, right around 30.
Yeah.
And all of your friends are getting married and getting houses and having kids. And you're just finishing school. You probably have a ton of debt unless you get lucky and you get, scholarships and all kinds of grants and aid and stuff. He said, and then you got to, kill yourself trying to find a job, and no one gets tenure anymore, at least not fast. Mm-hmm. And he goes, you could probably just make basically the same amount of money starting your 23 or 24 if you go to the right place. And it was kind of deflating at first, and then I was like, all right, well, I'll try it out and we'll see.
Yeah.
In retrospect, he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And when I talk to either former students in school, like in college, or current students in high school who want to be doctors, I think the number one thing that deters them is the time. Yeah. Most of them aren't worried about the money because they know or they believe eventually they'll make the money to pay it off. And they probably will. But they're not sure about the time, and so to your point, 4 years undergrad, 4 years plus a residency. Who knows if what happens if you're going to specialize in certain places? Things that can go even longer.
Right.
That's a lot to commit to, especially when you're like 18 to 20 years old when you're making the decision.
Yeah, and that's what I felt. Going through undergraduate, you learn so much about yourself, and you become the person that. I don't want to say that you start the journey of becoming your independent adult. And when I thought about the concept of just continuing another 4 years minimum of sitting in a library and working late into the night or working overnight to just learn more and to accumulate a huge amount of knowledge about medicine, I was like, that doesn't sound great, because I do that to some extent now in undergraduate. And then I was like, well, then I'm going to do all of that. So undergraduate, times 100. And then after that, do a residency where I'm working 24-hour shifts or something like that for $40,000 a year, 20, whatever it may be.
Right.
And then as you pointed out earlier, it's just you're 30 years old at the end of it. And then you're like, okay, well, now let me work for a hospital or start my own practice or something like that.
It's like you're just starting.
Yeah. You've done so much and you're just okay, now 10 years after undergraduate, and then you're like, okay, cool. I'm stable now. I can figure it out.
Yeah. Now I'm finally doing what, and again, I'm not, you have way more knowledge in this field and in all of this than I do. So I'm in no way suggesting that medical school wouldn't be important. I already go to a doctor who I'm not entirely sure about. Right. I don't want to make that worse.
Right.
But I think about a lot of very capable, very caring people who switch paths quickly.
Yeah.
I have a few students who are actually going to graduate this year. They're going to graduate in the top, 5% of their class. They've got through the roof SAT scores, and GPA is 4 or 5 something. It's and I don't mean this in a negative way, but they're choosing nursing, and nursing's great. Having had kids and been in the hospital, and my son was early. We were in the hospital for a month. We were just there for a month. In the NICU. I gained such a great appreciation for what nurses do. Nurses are your care providers in those settings. Unless you're actually in surgery, nurses are that primary point of contact. But I also think that we're looking at I'm thinking about a couple students in particular who have every bit of the intellectual capacity and the focus and the rest to do medical school, which most people don't have, who look at the entire sort of system of it and just know. Yeah. And that's fine. I think nurses are fantastic, and I think it's both admirable, and we need more of them, and they should be paid more. So I certainly wouldn't deter them from doing it. Right. But we also have a doctor shortage. Right. And we're looking at people who are choosing not to be a doctor. Right. And then, to what you're doing, at least for those kids, they're choosing early. But, if you're halfway through undergrad and you're making this decision, you're making this switch, and maybe you don't even know what your options are. Right. How many and I don't need a raw number, but of people that you studied with undergrad, how many people who had originally thought about being a doctor have done something else, or they've taken a year or two off to figure it out? I mean, is that something obviously you went through this, sounds like a few other people have. Yeah. When you think about, say, creating a website, creating a service to help those people, are you thinking about specific people? Do you have friends who you're they wish they had the advice in the same way you did? Yes,
absolutely. So I am keeping context for what I went through and what I saw my friends going through. And then also part of me making sure that my content is relevant is talking to current students, people who are in that right now. Right. From what I think around 75% of my pre-med friends ended up not immediately going into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and of that 75%, maybe like half of them like are now fully doing something else. Like they've been like, I am in finance and I love finance, or I'm in data and like data analytics and I love data analytics.
Right.
There's that other 50% is like, yeah, it's a thought in my mind and I might go back to school again or whatever. I might do like a post-bac program, but, or like I'm studying for my MCAT now kind of thing, but it's been 3 years since I've graduated, or almost between 2 and 3 years since I graduated college. And, it's like we were just talking about the track of like how long it takes to become a doctor. So it's just a more prolonged runway
to go back and do that. Yeah, I just, there are, gosh, I can think of 4 for sure. I do a bunch of tutoring, usually at the libraries, and 4 students who I taught at Broad Run who are currently somewhere around that 3rd, 4th year studying for their MCAT, and I see them at the library here and there. Yeah. And it's like they're looking exhausted and very shy. I just head down over a book. Right. And they see me and get a little wave, or when my student leaves, I walk over, hey, how's it going? What's up? And I'm like, oh, I'm studying for the MCAT. Yeah. How's it going? And it's always the same thing. Well,
deep breath time.
Yeah, well, it's coming up. I got and they never say it's good or it's bad. They tell me how long they have. that's the one. That's the only thing I know for sure. Like, sometimes I think about it and I check in. How did it go? Or I just assume I'll hear later anyway. But how's it going? And 100% of the time you ask the question, this is how long I have until the test. Not that I'm doing well. Not that I'm doing poorly. Yeah, I'm tired. I'm happy. I've got a month and a half. Right. it's like a prison sentence. Right. Doing,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and this can be like more broadly just like human suffering in general. It's like if you're going through a hard time, you try not to think about in the moment pain. Right. You think about a month and a half from now, I will be okay.
Yeah, this is going to be all right. I'm going to get through this. Yeah. Well, and how you just said about so many people doing different things, and a lot of them say working with finance or business or some tech jobs. This comes back, there's an article, I think it was in The Atlantic, and I've probably read it 4 or 5 times and shared it almost that many times. Yeah. And there's another teacher here who actually was on the podcast, I think, 3rd or 4th episode. Do you know Mr. Dunning, Jim Dunning?
Yeah, Jim Dunning, yeah.
Yeah, so he and I have talked about this a bunch, but the whole premise of the article is that college is really just signaling for most people. Mm-hmm. You're signaling the kind of person you are. I'm the kind of person that finished high school and goes to college. Mm-hmm. I have the general intelligence to get certain test scores, right? Yeah. I either come from a family with money, or I have found, I can do paperwork and I've found a loan. So that when you're done, unless it's something very specific, it almost doesn't matter what your degree is in. Mm-hmm. Would you have gotten your job, for example, if you didn't have was it the public health? Is that what you said was the second major? Yeah. So like, how important is that for you individually, like in getting your foot in the door? If that had been, human resources or English, right? Do you think you would have still gotten the job you have now?
I think it would depend on the story I could tell. And I think that if I was stepping into something entirely new, like when I was going through job interviews, every time with every person I interviewed, it didn't matter if it was like a person that just graduated the year before, or like someone like a senior manager or director or whatever, they would always be like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you in this room with me right now? And they're like,
I'm asking myself the same question everywhere I go.
It's funny you ask. So it's like, they would be like, you're a biology major, you're a public health major. We don't know any of those. Like why, what makes you think that this is the right path for you? And it wasn't so much like, more often than not, it was not so much being like, what are you doing here? Like, is this the right room for you? Or it was more of just like curiosity.
Well, and I mean, if you play it out right, though, when they say, we don't know any of that, and that's right. Like, well, good, because I do. Like I'm your guy.
That's exactly how to do it.
But outside of that, right, you point to some grades and test scores, you say, well, I'm smart and I'll learn fast. Right. Those in a lot of jobs.
Like learning fast was like, I can absorb everything really good. Yeah, really well. Yeah, I mean, like that would definitely be something to talk about. But if I didn't have public health, which gave me a very diverse field of experiences, right, that would have made it more difficult for me to even like consider going into a different field. Like if I was only biology, I don't think I would have given consulting, technology, or business like a second thought.
Right.
So
that's okay. So that's where you sort of got like a glimpse of, some of the other
right.
work.
I think like in public health degree, as an example, it's like we learn about like refugee camps and how a lot of like the aid distributed there is coordinated, and it's coordinated by utilizing technology and like with a database, and you give like social security numbers to refugees who are in the camp, and you track the rations that they receive all on a computer.
Right.
So as a undergraduate public health student, like I didn't learn about the details of creating that from a technical perspective.
But it's necessary.
I know it's necessary. Right. And that's kind of where things are changing, where it's like before, keeping with that example, it's like you would have had like a computer science engineer make that database and like do all the technical operations for it. And having a person with a public health degree in that space who is I know the importance of functional things pertaining to a refugee camp, and we need to accomplish those.
Right.
But they wouldn't be involved in that technical stuff. Now we're transitioning into a moment where people who do have public health degrees are like, we need to do that right. I'm going to do this now, and I don't need to wait for someone with an advanced computer science degree to do this. There's a lot of investment going in from education, from an educational perspective, that says like public health is now a technology thing, and it's like we need to make sure that public health students know that technology stuff.
Okay.
And that mostly gets into like advanced degrees, like master's degrees, but I think being able to speak to that kind of diversity of like, I'm a public health student, but public health is not only let me coordinate rations for refugees. It's like there is setting up that database is a public health initiative, and like we need to make sure that happens, and I want to make sure that happens. So
because you haven't gone to graduate school, correct?
I have not. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think you might?
Maybe if I feel that there's a blocker, but so far there hasn't been a blocker.
Right.
So
Yeah. That's you do it if you need to. I was just curious. So your exposure to a lot of this was through undergrad. Mm-hmm. For your undergrad, we've heard sort of the thinking pre-med and sort of change your mind, sort of last minute, pretty close to the end, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about the rest of your undergraduate experience? Like, where did you graduate from? How did you feel about it? Just sort of. I don't need like a full biography. I'm just saying.
No, sure.
We sort of jumped into the end of college and beyond, but there's like some groundwork that led to that point. Yeah. Did the rest of school, were you doing well? Were you happy? Was it good? Mm-hmm. Or the whole thing was a struggle, and so the change at the end was not surprising?
Sure.
What was going on for you undergrad before you had to make the decision to switch?
Yeah. So high-level overview of my undergraduate. I originally went to the University of Pittsburgh for my freshman year. I was there for a year, and then I transferred to the University of Virginia. And between those two things, I was still like biology focused. And I think like most students in their early 1 to 2 years of undergraduate, it's like I have the idea of what I want to do. Like I applied as a biology major, I was also applying as a German major, but it's like I ended up filling in my German with public health, and I ended like transitioning my passion from like hard science research of like antibiotic resistance and infectious disease over to like the biology of that is great, but what I really care about and what I discovered in that over the course of my academic life in undergraduate was I care more so about preventing those outbreaks from happening, and I care more about like approaching those holistically and remedying the problem and making sure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
So academically, that was kind of the transition there, and it was constantly changing, and I was trying so many different things. And the biggest criticism I have about myself in undergraduate was I always spread myself too thin.
Right.
But in hindsight, it's like I did that, and as a result, I figured out what I like to do.
Right.
So that's, I think, a general thing that people go through.
So when you think, Pitt has a great medical program.
Yeah.
They've got, the medical center, which is now sort of branching out statewide across Pennsylvania. And I mean, it's massive.
Yeah.
And then you go to University of Virginia, which has, I don't know, I want to say one of the best hospitals in the state.
In the state, yeah.
And so you move between two places that are very good at what you're interested in, what you want to do.
The biology programs at both schools are ranked exactly the same.
Yeah.
So,
what prompted for you, not so much why did you want to leave Pitt, though maybe that's part of it. What made UVA seem ideal to you? Because you'd already gone through, you're applying. Because I remember you came back and I was still in a trailer classroom, and I remember talking to you as that was going on. Yeah. But I don't remember what made UVA the right spot for you. How much that's academic versus social versus whatever. You're back to in-state, so you're probably saving some money. There's a lot of factors that go in. I thought about transferring after my first semester, and I didn't. And in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't. But I was one argument with my roommate away. There's any one of 50 things could have happened, and I would have been gone. Right. For you, either what made you transfer, what made your landing spot, what made UVA ideal for you? Yeah, and I think the original thought was I went to Pitt, and I was dead set on going to, I loved it, and I loved Oakland, and the school seemed like a great fit out of high school. And after that first year, I had gone through a lot of change in that perspective, naturally. But it's kind of straying away from what we're talking about as a whole, but it had to do with the administration. And I didn't feel that the resources were helpful in my learning. I think I leave it there. Yeah, but, that's fine. Yeah, I think that UVA was more student oriented, and I was happy with that. Right. I felt that when I went there, when I talked to my friends who were there, and I told them about the problems that I would have at Pitt. There would be on paper resources to go to, but in actuality they just didn't exist, or they didn't pull through, or they were selective. And I'm I don't understand how it needs to be a selective process for me to have experience at a research lab. Why do I have to apply to that? Why can't I'm in the program and I'm going through it? And going to UVA, I got a research position in the first semester that I was there by just talking to someone. Pitt was you have to go through the process and go through the process. Is Pitt bigger? It's about the same size, equivalent and same size. So, but I thought it was... That's where I almost transferred to. Yeah. I went to JMU, and my top two choices were, one was a school I probably never would have gone to, but my girlfriend at the time went there, so that was on the list. Yeah. And then Pitt, where I almost went out of high school, and a couple of my best friends were there. So I've been to Pittsburgh a million times. Yeah. Visiting. I'm from Pittsburgh. Yeah. We've talked about this, but yeah. Thinking about what you do now... Mm-hmm. It's maybe a little woulda, shoulda, coulda. This might not be fair, but knowing how things sort of played out, that you're now in a consulting role, in a business technology role. Yeah. Do you think one school or the other would have set that up better? If you could have switched your major after sophomore year, right? Or you know what I'm saying? If this revelation came to you sooner, do you think that you would have chosen a different school altogether? I think that UVA was, even for the path that I ended up turning out in, was the better choice for me. I think that Pitt, it has the same, my mom worked, Pittsburgh has the same companies that DC has, to a certain extent. And my company Accenture has an office in Pittsburgh. Right. I don't know, I don't regret transferring to UVA, and I feel confident in that decision to do that. Yeah. With going through the rest of the 3 years of undergrad. Right. I don't know. Well, it's a question. It's probably a bad question. Because I think for myself, what would have been different if I had transferred from James Madison to the University of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And socially, a lot would have changed. Yeah. I don't know if that much would have changed academically. Yeah. Whether or not I would end up teaching, I don't know. Yeah. I do know if I would have ended up teaching, I would be in Pennsylvania right now and not Virginia. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, it's hard to say what the difference would be. I think I would have stuck with German if I stayed at Pitt. And I don't know if I would have gone down the public health route. I don't know if they offer, if they do now, then I don't know if they did offer a major when I was there. Right. I think that, so... by transferring it, it literally changed the opportunity. A lot of the friends that I had staying in a biology program at Pitt ended up from how I saw it, at a higher percentage would just stay in that pre-med rut. Mm-hmm. Even if they ended up not going to medical school, they would graduate with a bio degree, and then they would just kind of they don't know what to do next. Right. That was from what I observed, but
that could be entirely wrong. Like,
I mean, and a lot of this is always sort of, observational or coincidental or whatever. So it's hard to see the big picture. Actually, I'm going to ask you this. I thought about it a minute ago, and this is just out of curiosity. Since you have the interest in medicine and then public health, and we're talking about technology and trying to facilitate good decision making, preventing the outbreak rather than treating it, kind of stuff.
Right.
Have you read Hans Rosling's book Factfulness?
No.
All right, so I recommend it. I'll send you a link to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. It was I listened to the audiobook over the summer. Do you know who I'm talking about? Like, he's done a bunch of TED Talks.
No. Well, I may have come across him.
Passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I think actually as he was finishing the book. But he's one of the most popular TED speakers ever because he does all these weird visuals, like with buckets
I think
of
I
bubbles.
have come across
Or he does
him.
like the big bubble graphs.
He passed away?
Gapminder.org is his website. Where you can find out
I remember when he
stuff.
did like social inequalities of health, or the
exactly.
GDP of a country,
and so you can compare and contrast and do all the factors. Gapminder.org is great, and just to see, because you get these visual representations of the comparative wealth or the populations or access to healthcare and education.
I think,
And so, he did a bunch of data presentations through TED that were really stunning because data usually isn't sexy. Like, it's usually not interesting.
Right.
They did that. But in the book, I forget, it's like 7 things or 10. It's 7 or 10 things, something that we basically need to know and need to do. But a lot of it comes back to not forgetting the human condition, but essentially trusting that if you're gathering the right information and you have a good infrastructure in place, we have the technology, we can actually analyze what we're seeing, to trust it, to go with it. And he tells all these like great anecdotes of like traveling with medical students, because I mean he was a doctor, but later in his life he becomes public health data guy.
Yeah,
and so he does that transition. And I just thought the book was really cool because it talks some of the things that you said and how your interest is maybe less, giving the kid the vaccine than coordinating that we have the right number of vaccines in the right place, and that we have all the things we need to get it there and have the trained people, to assess the situation properly. And the book, is probably way more interesting than I'm making it sound, but he tells all about that. And that's what got me sort of thinking about like how much more interesting public health sounds than actual medicine. So when you said some of that, I'm like, that's perfect. Like, I'll send you a link to it.
I would love to see it.
But he addressed some of the same stuff. So, all right. So my other question then, since we did sort of the undergrad thing, I taught you in 11th grade English.
Yeah.
Were you in the UNICEF Club? We did that.
I
you
was.
Did that, right? It was like the first or the second
we
year
did
of the club.
Syria.
The
banquet.
Supper for Syria.
Supper for Syria, yeah, that's
so
right.
it was maybe the second year the club. I don't know. You were one of the first couple years when we
started.
Another teacher runs it now, but we did all kinds of stuff, and that again comes back to some public health.
Right.
All the fundraising went to UNICEF, and then everybody argues about how well or poorly they use their money and the rest.
Yep.
But so I got to know you a little bit outside of class, and then obviously in an English class. Think about your high school experience, and you can good, bad, or otherwise. Do you think high school was effective? And whatever that means, did you enjoy it, or did you learn things that were useful in life? I mean, maybe did I use it in college, but do you use anything from high school now even?
Yeah. I like my job right now, and I think public health professionals or public health practitioners, it's like you need to be able to communicate your point to anyone. And when you're talking about spending resources that are scarce from a government, local, state, or federal, if you can't convince someone or make a rational case for something, then you've already lost.
Right.
Or if you're not aware enough to understand the context in which you're operating something in, then you can be blindsided at any moment and lose funding or get like overwhelmed to a certain extent. I mean, that's what happened with was it IRC, International Rescue Committee? They're a strong arm in refugee resettlement in the United States, and they actually have an office in Charlottesville. Okay. And once the Trump administration came into place, they lost so much funding because there are no refugees to take care of anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like they were at that point in time, like a year after the Trump administration started. It's like, we are now like not just a rescue committee. We're not just refugee resettlement. We are now like refugee advocacy. We're understanding root causes for how policy shifts can take place.
Redefine yourself very quickly.
Right. And I mean, like, you find yourself in that position, not necessarily because out of ignorance, because new problems happen all the time and you can't forecast that for that kind of stuff. And you want to be dedicated to the mission that you are providing. And speaking to UNICEF like that, and like as a context, it's like people look at administrative costs and something like understanding lobbying efforts, that would be an administrative cost.
Right.
So it's like people don't want to donate to something that has high administrative costs and things like that.
Without understanding what that actually means sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you always have to be on your toes and acquiring the skills to communicate. English classroom, like being able to understand, like written and verbal, carry a point from start to finish is very appropriate. And my writing definitely developed a lot between the start of high school and the end of college, but it was put on the trajectory to be like, yeah, like fix this, fix that, make this more clear, form a proper thesis statement. And like, if I didn't go through that, or if I didn't think that was important at all, then I would be bad at my job right now.
Right. You know, and that's the one, I think I actually said this in maybe the last or next to last podcast episode. The last two guys I talked to are running for school board.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we'll see how that plays out tomorrow.
Yeah.
But both do either project management or consulting. You know, both are computer science tech guys.
Yeah.
And then both talked over and over about how it's so much, you know, their communication skills are at least as, if not more important than all the technical knowledge they have. And I think a lot of people say that. It makes me feel better about, you know, I always say English class is your most important class. And I'm obviously biased, but it's the one class you can guarantee everyone's going to use.
Right.
Like there isn't a job that exists where you're not going to use it. Well, there are, but you'll never be promoted.
Right.
Like you can never be the manager if you can't run the meeting. And so, you know, you might find a job where you don't need a lot of this, but if you're content with, you know, unless you're content with never being promoted, never taking a leadership role, you're going to need some of these skills.
Right.
Think about the rest of high school. You know, you played sports.
Yeah.
You were involved in the building lot. Obviously, you took German, took foreign language.
Yeah.
You know, think history, science, whatever. And I'm not necessarily asking you to like trash talk school or to rah it up, but how much of your high school experience was good or has proven to be useful?
Yeah, I think, like, overall, I'm pretty happy with my high school experience.
Yeah.
I would say it's not so much as the tasks performed as the skills acquired or started that were refined since then, like ongoing refinement. Like German, well, you have to talk all the time. And now I like don't even question talking all the time. Right. Public speaking is a different story. Like that's something that I've had to work on tremendously over the years. But biology, sciences, critical thinking, things like that, in like a knowledge, matter of fact kind of way. Understanding what is black and white, but also like leading you to question everything and leading you to constantly like be open-minded or ready to be like counterpointed by just a black and white fact.
Right.
And then what took me longer is like on the soft sciences side of that is like, well, like understanding different perspectives and understanding how people think through something and like not like, and it's totally okay, but like not knowing like the answer to an ambiguous question. Right. Because there's no one right answer to it. Some like hypothetical or some like metaphysical question. That's what humans do. That's what they've done for hundreds of years.
It's all the best stuff. But some people, especially if you focus too hard on the, I mean, you know, obviously the MCATs, but I mean, just thinking like, you know, your SOLs through high school. Right. If you focus too hard on those tests, you probably start getting uncomfortable with the open-ended questions. Because in any standardized setting, we're always looking at a defined answer, unless there's an essay, in which case there's still a defined rubric. You know, there's always, you know, and so when you move away from things that are so clearly defined, I don't know. I just, you know, I've been obviously talking to people for a long time, not recording it. The recording it is the new part here. You know? But I feel like people's responses are so different because I think you do use a lot of school. I just find myself through these conversations questioning how much of it do you use, or at least how much of it do we need to force people into. You know, I don't know that everyone needs to do all of the things we do. Right. But I also don't necessarily want to let people off the hook too much because like it's almost never going to hurt you to learn new things. Right.
No, I think that's a lifelong journey that everyone should embrace, lifelong learning. And like I said, it doesn't even matter like so much the results of that, knowing these facts. It's developing the work ethic to pursue the truth or pursue facts, and like being able to make rational sacrifices to some extent.
Right.
I played football for all 4 years, and it wasn't the favorite part of my day.
Yeah.
Like, believe it or not, like we're doing 2 to 4 hour workout every day for the entire year was not fun every day.
It's fun sometimes. It's not
fun sometimes. Yeah.
Not all the time.
And then like, but it's like I did it, and I did it for all 4 years. I don't regret. I think I would regret had I quit at some point and just been like, oh, I don't want to do it. But while the tasks performed aren't necessarily applicable to anything I really do now, it's like, well, I know how to work in a team. I know how to collaborate. I know how to work with people that I may disagree with stuff on, or may have like conflicting personalities with.
Perseverance, determination, being coachable and teachable, and
being receptive to coaching. I think that's incredible.
I do, and it's almost silly that we don't, given that certain sports at least, end up being year round. I mean, there are rules in place that limit the number of practices, that limit the number of coach contacts. That's fine, and I think that's probably a good thing. But that doesn't mean that kids aren't going to the weight room. It doesn't mean that you're not having kids get together and run informal practices because everyone knows what the rules are. And I think for the most part, schools are good about observing the rules. It doesn't mean you're not still engaged in what is essentially a year-round activity. Unless you're in another sport that you're good at, and you can convince your coach to be cool with that, you're still expected to do this. Why on earth does that kid have to take PE? And that's not downplaying the significance of being fit or learning health. It just you're already doing that, and maybe we could work that into your day a little bit better, because it's a long day. That's the best part of college, is you get to start. Time management's hard, but once you figure it out, you've got so much more free time there to make those decisions, and we don't really do a lot of that here.
Right. Yeah. And I think I went through like a ebb and flow of college where it's like you get overwhelmed at first, and then I stabilized a little bit, and then like right at the end of it, I was like, do I even know how to study? Like, do I what, everything that I'm doing right now, am I doing it right? I'm like, it was really weird, but
what am I doing?
Literally, I'm like in the last 2 semesters of my college degree, and I'm like, I don't know how to learn this stuff anymore.
That's like an existential crisis.
Right.
That has more to do with just trying to figure out why am I doing it.
That's true.
Because if I don't know why I'm doing it, I always tell kids that I'll never forget this. It was my first year teaching honors 11th grade, which is a class I taught you in. And that's before AP was an 11th grade option. So now you do AP honor, whatever.
Yeah.
One of the smartest people I've ever taught. Her plan at that time was to double major in, I guess it was just going to be bio or something, but the plan, and she's done something close to this. This girl, her plan was to study neuroscience, or she wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and then go to law school, because she had found this niche where when there's a malpractice issue or a criminal, like anything going on, there's like 2 people in the world that can actually do this job. Yeah. I'm going to do that job. Now she's gone to, I think she's got a PhD in something with neuroscience. As far as I know, the law degree hasn't happened. I don't know. But I'll never forget when I did student feedback. It was my first time teaching honors class, and I probably made it way too hard. You should always make it too hard, because I can always curve a grade up. I can't curve a grade down, Right. Once I tell you don't have to work that hard, I can never get you to work hard again. So
that's true.
It's better to make it too hard. You can ease back a lot better than go the other way. But she said, I wish you wouldn't waste the first 5 to 7 minutes of every class telling us what we're going to do and why we're going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, man, I thought about it. I'm like, this is like the smartest kid in the room. I mean, in a real sense, this is maybe the smartest person in the entire school building at this moment. She doesn't need this because she looks at the things she knows. Yeah. Most people don't know. They don't even look at the plan like that's from last week. Like, they don't know what that means, half of them. And the ones who know what it is, they don't know why they're going to do it. And I always think if you don't know why you're doing something, it's really hard to decide like what's an appropriate level of effort. And how do I dedicate myself? How do I focus myself? And so when why starts to get a little hazy, even what gets a little confusing. What am I doing is really tricky if I don't know why I'm doing it. You know what I mean? Like all those pieces have to support each other.
Yeah, Drop Dead Premed. That's exactly what happened. It happens in my office right now. I work with people from a bunch of different backgrounds, and we put them all in one building, and we're like, do this thing. And a lot of that, like, they're smart people. Like, if they don't know the context of what they're doing, they won't work hard on doing it. They're like, I'll get it done. Like, it'll get done and we'll be fine. But no one wants to work most people don't want to work in a workplace where it's just like, okay, let's just clock in, clock out. And like, no one will get in trouble kind of thing.
Right.
It's exciting to push forward and to like really explore the boundaries and limits of the work like the actual content itself,
right? As
opposed to just like what is required by the contract that we work on.
Go through the basic motions,
right?
But I mean, to do that, you have to, as an employee, probably in any company. And I mean, I'm thinking from school perspective, from the handful of other jobs I've done here and there, like you have to be empowered to do those things.
Yeah,
which means you have to know what you're doing. You also need to know why you're doing it. You need somebody has to answer a lot of questions for you, or you need to figure them out.
Yeah,
to have the sort of the license to go above and beyond. I mean,
right.
The easy thing is just do what's asked and leave it alone.
Right.
You're never going to be great doing that.
Right. Doing like Drop Dead Premed, this is my first kind of like independent thing, and up until now I was in school, I worked at my office job, and that's what I do. Like I hang out with friends otherwise and pretty social, and aside from like organized effort, it's up to you. And this kind of thing is very much like I've had to do exactly that. It's like I have an idea, there's a need that I think that I can fill, and to some extent have been like doing unofficially on the side or through something else.
Right.
And it should be more structured, it should be better, it should be more available and accessible. So doing this kind of thing is exactly that. And the need there is clear in my mind.
Right.
I've had to say it to myself over and over again.
right.
But it's, and not only like to myself, but like you said, getting other people, instigated other people to tell me what I'm doing is right.
Right.
Or like maybe instigate is not the best word, but when you're doing something new for the first time, there is that hesitation or that concept of doubt that you're just like, I don't have to do this.
You need some reassurance.
Yeah.
Hey, trust me, every time.
Is it zero? Yeah. Like,
every time I catch myself editing a podcast at 1:30 in the morning when I could have been asleep, because that's my only time, because I got kids I want to hang out with, I got a wife I want to hang out with, I got papers I got to grade, I got, like, this is an optional extra thing. Mm-hmm. And so I find myself at certain moments, is anyone going to care if they hear that car honk in the background? Right. And then I'm like, no, I care. Right. You know? But then once in a while, though, I got to ask somebody like, hey, you did listen? How'd it sound?
Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm not, like you need, it's reasonable to look for reassurance, mm-hmm. or especially for, say, what you're doing is a little more specific. Mm-hmm. To make sure that when you're working with a specific audience and a specific task like that,
right,
that audience's needs are being met. I mean, I can just stand here and yap about whatever and ask some questions, and someone will listen to. Like, you've got a couple of friends who are going to be suckered into this,
right? They're like, oh yeah, bring it in.
but
thank God it's not that. We have a standard that you're not going to let that car honk slide by. Like, that's going to, and like, undoubtedly, if anyone said like, oh no, it would have been better if you just like left it there, or it would have been like fine, I'm like, no, like removing a annoying noise is better.
Annoying. It's like you do it if you can. That's what opens the door to doing a thing well. That you still have to figure out what is the thing I'm doing.
True.
So all right, so because we talked about high school, and before we get sort of circle back entirely to Drop Dead Premed, one of my standard questions is, if you had a school, we've talked about graduate school a little bit, as the idea. We've talked about undergrad, we've talked about high school. If you had your own school, imagine private school, so there's little or no regulation that's going to affect you. But you got a building, you got a student body, you got a budget, and you can run the school any way you want. What would you do? Would it look like school does today? Would it look similar?
Oh, no.
Would it what would you get to run the school, and you get a year or 2 or 3, whatever, to run things and see how it goes. What would you do in your school?
Sure. It would be much more integrated into society than I think current schools are now. Seeking out high school, whatever, but seeking out, taking like career day or like showcasing your parents' job or whatever, and like timesing that to like a year-round thing. Right. Like, so probably like more like internship,
apprenticeship, something like that.
Right. Had I known in high school that a lot of doctors aren't happy with their current lifestyle or their like profession,
Right.
I probably would have questioned it a little bit more at that point in time,
Right.
as opposed to 4 or 5 years later. I think that's entirely useful because I was just looking at like what my family practitioner was doing, and I was like, okay, he's cool and he loves his job.
Yeah.
And I never got to really, at a mature age, like, dive into what about doctors that work at a health institute, like,
Right.
or like, or at a regional health system, and like, how do they feel about their job, and what are the issues that they face every day, and am I ready for those issues?
Yeah. And not having been there.
Right.
You know.
I didn't know, and that's like college accessible knowledge. It's like if you don't like have a connection to a doctor who's in that setting,
Right.
and you're kind of just on your own island, and you're like, oh, like I will go to college, I'll be a bio major, and I'll do some research there. I'll be able to like get my volunteer hours at a hospital there, and so on and so
Right,
forth.
right.
That's a college thing.
Right.
Oftentimes, like that's just how it happens, and making that purely college is a mistake. It should be a middle school,
you can do
high
at least
school
some
thing.
of that now. You know,
Yeah.
People always say, you know, we're trying to help kids figure out, you know, in high school, we're trying to help people figure out what they're good at
Mm-hmm.
or what they're interested in. But you're really only doing like, you know, 5 things in high school. You're doing sort of the same 5 things, just with different content.
Right.
So would that be? I mean, is that like a learning by doing all the time, or would you have like? And I don't know, and I don't know if you have an answer to it, but like, would it be like you're in class every other day and you're doing your internship, or you're doing class for 2 hours in the morning and then you're going out and doing stuff? Do we just bail on class at some point entirely?
No, class is important.
You know,
Yeah.
well, you know, I mean, I think depending on what
Yeah,
you want
no,
to do, I think, and I've said this on a few of these episodes, I really think if we were more serious about academic rigor in middle school, which is
Right.
hard because the social and emotional side's so tricky at that time,
Yeah.
we could drill a lot of the content. Most people could probably be done with high school by 10th grade.
Sure.
And I mean, especially if you're going to work in a skilled trade or something like that, like even a lot of computer science applications, there's no reason you need to do the second half of high school. You could probably get you straight into computer science and
like,
have you actually doing a job by the time you're
Right.
20, you know?
People hype, I mean, like technology is like everything, like it's huge now and it'll only get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Like,
Right.
so, I mean, where people should be getting trained on, like I know there's like coding integrated into the curriculum nowadays.
Kinda.
Yeah. So and I don't know
say
the
that.
details.
I don't
They
know.
say
Yeah.
that. Like
Yeah.
I think I saw my sister. She's 14, so it's like she like had a computer and was doing like coding stuff.
Yeah,
and, like,
And some classes definitely do.
Right. I didn't see XML or HTML website design languages until I was doing fun, quote unquote, fun stuff on the side in college.
Right.
It was never taught to me in biology, public health, even in college. So if I like, that would be great integrated now. And like, in the skills that are required to do like a full-time professional's job in that field are not very high. They are like, they're hard and it's struggle, but it's like, once you learn the language, it's okay. I know it. And you can learn it. I learned it in a year on the job.
Yeah.
And if you're in school doing it like every day, grinding for the details, then you can do it in a semester.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I know I did an internship program at a tech company right up the street from here. And that was something they said that they were actually hiring more and more people right out of high school. Mm-hmm. It was you have kids, and they said and I remember like I laughed, and then I thought like, well, that makes sense. They said that what surprised them at first, as they started sort of broadening who they were looking at to hire to do just coding, just
Right.
you got to know a handful of programming languages, and we can get you doing this. That so many of these kids are coming, one, right out of high school, and two, generally didn't have very good grades. Mm-hmm. And then, but it makes sense because they're sitting in a chemistry class, and not obviously chemistry is important. It's just maybe not important to every individual.
Yeah.
And so the kid's just doing the bare minimum to get through with a D+, C-, whatever.
Right.
They're spending all their time they should have been, quote unquote, should have been studying chemistry, teaching themselves something where they're a year or two out of high school and they're making more than their chemistry teacher made.
Right.
And I'm not going to say that money is more important than learning, though it probably is.
Happiness is most important.
Yeah. But maybe we don't line those things up well. So you would think more along the lines of actually getting students into the community, into the job place a little more.
Right. And I think I was hungry for that kind of experience even in college. Like, it's like we would have something entirely in the classroom, and then you would go do an internship over the summer, over the fall break or something like that.
Right.
if there was a consistent blending of, okay, like in the morning you're going here, and then in the afternoon you come back to the classroom, we're going to digest everything that you absorbed, and then tomorrow you'll spend the morning in the classroom and then the afternoon here.
Right.
There definitely needs to be like, it can't just be like, you're going to go here, observe and learn, and then you're ready. It's in that like learning stage of everything. It's like, sit down, observe, and then you need to unwind everything that you just took in.
Unpack it, reflect on it, do
exactly.
all that. And I think that's great.
You do that with readings.
You do, yeah. So. Read it. I've gotten away from it a little bit. We still do it sometimes, but it's read to this point. You show up and I ask you 5 hard questions. If you get 3 of them, you're good.
Right.
We just got to trick you into reading somehow.
Yeah.
And then it's we talk, or you write, or you talk, or whatever. But that's the whole thing is you got to figure out how to apply it and how to connect it.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think largely, like in the sciences especially, it's when you're just in a classroom setting, it's harder to get that because it's just, you get to know these facts, and then we'll test you on it at the end of the chapter or something like that.
And then, also moving to the other model of more active, more community engagement is great.
Right.
One, it's difficult to schedule, but it's very difficult to assess. And so, and that's where, if you're the person that legislates, and this is why I said, imagine it's a private school or it's whatever.
Right.
Because if you're getting county or state funding, someone's going to want to know, is it working? And how do you test it when you have kids going to 50 different businesses and doing all these things? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think
probably a concern it's not that we shouldn't have it. We should maybe just be a little less concerned about it.
Right.
But I think sometimes, like for your idea, which is good, I think a lot of people are promoting exactly what you're saying. Yeah. That's the part where it gets tough, because how do you convince a legislator who doesn't know as much about education to do something like that? Right. If you can't prove results.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have to, I would be like, I think the only way to really definitively convince someone to do it and be like, we've already done it, and this is what has been the outcome.
Right. Yeah. So they have to start with a charter school or private school or something like that.
Like UVA is actually changing their entire curriculum right now. And it was like a huge overhaul of especially like first and second year courses. Right. And they did a small pilot program, and then they assessed it or whatever after the fact to see how the overall impressions are from faculty and the students, and then they expanded and so on and so forth. So that all happened under one roof, technically. Right. So
see, I like that. I feel like in most school systems, especially say larger school systems like this, where you have a lot of different schools, you have a lot of different principals, there's a lot of moving parts. Sometimes we get a new initiative and it's just everyone's doing this. Mm-hmm. And you think, man, like that would have been really good if we could have picked like 1 or 2 schools, roll it out for a year, maybe 2. Mm-hmm. 1, to make sure it's working, but 2, to work out the bugs a little bit. And I think what happens a lot of times is the plan is already everyone's going to do it regardless of the outcome. So, now we're all 1-to-1. All the kids get a Chromebook, all the teachers get a laptop. Yeah. And they phase it in over 3 years. And that's great, but the decision's made. Right. And I don't know that we were going to run into too many drawbacks. I just think, that's probably a direction we're going. But there's a lot of other things we do where even if one school tries it, it's well understood that everyone else is going to do it the next year, regardless of that first set of results. Okay. And I think an honest sort of, you need a control group, and you need to test the thing, and and I don't know that we actually do that a lot.
Are you saying actually scientifically prove something to be successful?
Yeah, schools love data these days.
It's crazy how that's transferable.
We don't. Well, the interesting thing is we don't necessarily use a lot of the data. We collect a ton of data, and I mean, for me personally, my classroom data. The most important things I do is there's a couple grades that I look at carefully. I mean, I look at them all, but I mean, like I'm making big decisions based on just a couple of these things, and kids sort of feedback in the classroom and participation. Yeah, I know I have access to a ton of other stuff. Right, I don't have the time. Right, it's not and so that's where you either got to pay somebody to do this or free
consultants.
Up the time. Right. Maybe that's what I do. I sneak into that role. That's how I'll get rich.
Yeah. Oh my God. I don't know about that. You're dealing with everyone's problems that they don't want to deal with. So
that's what I do. I teach high school.
Are you talking about the kids?
No, never. No.
No. I was I think. To a large concept, you have to make decisions off of that. You can't. No one has the bandwidth to look at all the students that you have and unless you're in a private school and you're teaching 10 kids for the entire year. It's like no one can go to every data, like grade data point that says like, okay, you did this, and like how much does that weight into your final grade, and like, well, there was context for this grade and that grade, and like so let me weight it differently. You have to you choose like those highlighted moments in time, moments in grades that you're just like, that's more important.
Yeah,
like,
that's the indicator that I at least understand well enough and have the time to use.
Okay, yeah, and like I think, God, the tying into my biology degree, like indicator. There's an indicator species for everything, for like how climate change is going, how like an ecosystem's changing. There's always an indicator species. So an indicator species is transferable to the classroom.
Nice, yeah. Well, that's I got my indicator species in the grade book. There's 20 things in there. There's 3 of them that really steer what I'm doing.
Right.
All right, so I thought of this as random. We're going to wrap up here in a minute, but I have one regular question, and I've got another one.
Yeah. I'll be quick.
No, this is okay. This was suggested by a few students this year. This is something that in my classes, especially in AP, we're doing a lot more philosophy, because
wonderful.
Like I hit a point where I'm like, man, I just can't keep reading the same like boring papers about a book. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with the book or the paper. If you write it poorly, it's just bad. But if I ask you a good, philosophical question, something about ethics or whatever, even if the paper's poorly written, usually it was still interesting because people feel like it reflects on them. Yeah. So I'm actually doing it more even in my academic and some of the lower level classes, just because like all of a sudden I don't mind that you have no idea how to use a comma, because I recognize like you have a real idea, Right. So we do a lot of thought experiments as a beginning, like as a way to like get into a book or whatever. So the trolley problem?
Oh yeah, the tracks.
Right. Yeah. So you got 5 on one, and then the 1 on the side. So you're familiar. Right. So I want to say from the public health standpoint, not personal, but I don't think you can separate them. What would be the thought process when you're thinking about like how do you treat, say like there's 5, say remove them from train tracks, and it's 5 sick kids here, 1 sick kid here. Like, right. What's the process? I'm just thinking you're going to teach me something I'm going to take back to the next year when we do this. We've already done it in my class this year.
I'm going to give you like consulting philosophy.
Well, right. I'm saying like, how would you make the decision? Because I always tell everybody, here, I'm going to draw it on a Post-it note, right? So you got the train, and you got the here, and so you got the one guy, and I'm always setting them up to, they're going to ask about, well, who's the person on the track? Oh, no. And as soon as they do it, and I say, that's a wonderful question. They're all like, yeah. And I said, does it matter? And you only get 3 kids in the room. You're like, And everyone else is like, of course it matters. I'm like, so it's your mom, it's this, it's that. I said, well, if it's an old guy, it's whatever. Yeah. And it's really, really easy at this point, because then, they'll say, well, if you change who the people are, I'll change my answer. And I said, well, that's the first and easiest indication that you do not believe in the equality of all mankind. Right, yeah. You don't actually think that. But if they are faceless strangers, as the thought experiment goes, what would be the process? Because I'm just guessing you're probably going to save the 5 and you're going to kill the 1 and save the 5. Yeah.
Good guess.
Well, it becomes very utilitarian. Right. But, obviously it might change if we're like, change the nation of origin or the economic status or the race or whatever. Like any one of those things could change it. But like, what would be the process? Is it always a numbers game, I guess is what I'm getting at.
In reality, I think in reality, when these kind of situations do come and happen,
in actual public health,
almost never like a numbers game. Or no, I was too strong on that. It is it's a nuanced situation.
A numbers game with context.
Yeah. Right. From like my standpoint, and when I face these conceptually, it's like, do you go down the route? Well, no. Like, you save the 5 people, like plain and simple, but you learn nothing about them. You don't know anything about them, and you keep it that way. Because otherwise you're just like, you're introducing your own bias to make that decision for you. Right. So say that there's a nationality here in this one, like if you go down that path, right? Or say there's a nurse here, and then there's a doctor over here. Well, if you're biased to say like, well, doctors go through more training and they're more education and they're paid more or whatever, then I'm going to say the doctor. But if you're going to talk to the person who is in the like sitting for a month in the NICU about like, who do you want to save? You're going to save the nurse. Yeah. Because you're like, this nurse knows what she's doing. She knows how to take care of
my kid. She's doing all this stuff. Yeah.
And she's like balancing the patient, the family, the friends, and consideration of like financial need and like what HR is saying and what the doctor is saying. Right. And all that's happening at the same time.
And so, but like, should I have that consideration?
No, I don't
Like
think,
I said, I mean, if it's
no.
5 random people and I know this is the nurse doing all the stuff,
Right.
my feeling changes. I don't think my answer changes, but
Right.
I've also thought about this plenty of times before.
Right. No, it's totally not appropriate to think any more than there are 6 people on a train track and you can say 5 or one of them.
Yeah.
That's it.
Period. So you make it the numbers game.
Yeah.
As much as you can.
Yeah. I mean, because if you're asking for context, you're trying to feed your bias. Like,
right. Well, right. Okay. All right. So just since I already did it, do you know the extension of it with the bridge?
No.
Okay. So here, this one, I'm only going to do this since you'd already heard of it. So you didn't have to struggle through this.
I've thought through. Yeah. I mean,
Now there's no sidetrack.
Okay.
Okay. There's a train barreling down the tracks. The brakes can't stop.
Yeah.
5 people there. Mm-hmm. And you are up here on a walking bridge right over it. You see the train coming. It's going to hit the 5. You can't stop it. You can't yell. Mm-hmm. But you realize this trolley's hauling right there. There's a big fat dude right next to you, and he's leaning over, looking down. Do you push the fat man to save the 5 on the tracks the same way you would have flipped the switch? It's 1 here, so it's 5 versus 1 still. The question now, and I'm only doing this to you because you already had an answer for the regular flip the switch. It's still 5 versus 1.
Right.
It's you and the fat man on the bridge, and if you give that fatty a push, he hits, and somehow he's fat enough to stop the trolley.
Yeah.
Do you still do it?
No.
Why not?
Because it's active. It's active malice.
Just flipping a switch. That's
I
active.
know, but you're actively flipping a switch, changing the gears on the track. You're not pushing a person over.
So what if he was standing on like a service gate, like a little trap door in the bridge, and you just had to like kick a pin out, and he fell through? You had to put your hands on him.
Yeah, I mean that's the same thing. It'd be like,
kick the pin, drop the fat man.
I would.
Save the 5.
Well, I mean, like now it's like, well, where was this lever before? Like, was it right next to that one guy, or was it like tucked away off? Yeah. I don't know. Now I'm like, I should have just gone back to the first scenario and just been like, oh, I'll walk away. Like, what lever?
That's kids always try to pull that. So I've made up my own. I'll have to draw a diagram someday and put this on the website.
Right. You're handcuffed to a lever.
I call it the Tibbens cage of fire.
Oh God.
There's 2 paths, and you can put anyone you want in these, and you're here, and they're both going to fall into lava. You can open one and let them out. So if you got 5 in this box, so you got 5 people.
You can put
suspended.
whoever in here.
Well, so when too many kids in the class all say, "Well, I mean, I don't want to pull the lever. I don't want to. I'm just going to walk away and pretend like I wasn't there." And I'm like, that is not the point.
Right.
Inaction is action.
Yeah.
Choosing not to do something just lets those 5 die anyway.
Right.
So they say,
it's a decision.
They say that's what I would do, and I said, well, how about this? Put 5 people in the one box, suspended over a pool of lava, and 1 in the other. If you walk away, 6 people die. Or you walk up and you can save the 1 or the 5. Now what do you do?
It's like you're playing.
And then,
do you like Saw by any chance?
I've never seen it.
Okay, yeah.
Is it kind of like that?
It's exactly like this.
Okay.
It's more like inflicting self-harm to save someone else, or not doing that.
So then when the kid's like, well, but if it was my mom, and I'm like, all right, now your mom's in the box, and you got to save him from the lava.
Right.
I don't know. I just think because, like I said, when I talked about, we haven't actually done this in my academic class yet, but we did in the AP classes early in the year to start, the first book that I signed during the school year now. And a couple of kids had heard that I was doing a podcast, and they said, why don't you do stuff like that? And I was like, I feel like I'm going to trap somebody.
Yeah.
Or sometimes visuals are important. People are listening right now who don't know the trolley problem.
Right.
I have no idea what we're talking about. Like I'm going to have to link to a YouTube video for explanation. But I was just thinking, like, for your job, or maybe not your job, but the field at least that you're working in, sometimes those numbers do matter, and sometimes it is life or death. So asking you is a little bit more fair than asking certain other people.
Yeah, I would say I'm in the fortunate position where if like it does come down to a numbers game, the consequences of that aren't necessarily someone dies directly from me.
You're like, I'm not pulling levers. I'm more the guy that makes the lever work.
Like I'm like oh yeah, you hire me to make that work? Yeah, sure. Also to note, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I have a bioethics minor, and I'm like studying a lot of philosophy.
You're lucky you didn't tell me that, because we'd be here for another hour.
Okay, great. Oh man, it's another time. For every decision you could make in that scenario, in any kind of these scenarios, you can find a famous philosopher to agree with you.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So
someone's thought about it,
right?
That's the fun of it.
And that's what they've all been doing. Yeah, exactly.
Have you read this book?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's good to consider a bunch of this stuff. Like,
yeah,
it does the trolley problem, then it does like, do you cannibalize someone on the life raft when you're all dying and running out of food, or is it moral or ethical? Should you be allowed to sell your own organs?
Right.
Things like that. And
yeah. I mean, there was, I think, the biggest question that I have held on to since undergraduate is the question of suicide. It's very intensely personal.
Yeah.
And this country, like the United States, it's a crime to kill yourself. Like, you just can't.
We're going to put you in jail.
Right. And I mean, like, I've gone through a roller, like, along this whole, like, everything we talked about here, my mental health has been an ever increasing focus of mine. Like, I want to make sure that I'm, like, grounded, stable, happy.
Taking care of yourself.
Taking care of myself. And in the course of, and I mentioned like Premed being strongly identity driven. When you lose that, it's like you have to figure everything out again.
Right.
So going through that, like starting from the ground up again, reframing my mental state, reframing who I am and how I see myself.
Right.
Getting to a point, highs and lows.
Yeah.
And like I've never gone to the point where I've like considered suicide, but I've like, when you're in a mental state of like sadness, perfect. Well, that's awesome. So that's an invasion of my privacy. But,
that's funny.
Yeah, but it's like everyone's nowadays everyone's hyper aware about it, and I mean like in going through undergraduate, I became hyper aware about it. Like you see my friends that are going through insane, like questioning their self-worth and like questioning the core of who they are to be right. And it's like, if you drop all of that, I mean, like it's very difficult to pivot. It's not a professional pivot. It's a life pivot.
Yeah, it's a personal thing.
So
you've dedicated yourself to this thing since you were 15 or 5 for some people.
And you failed at it.
Yeah.
Like if that's your mindset about it.
Yeah.
Like when I was an undergraduate, I was like, everyone should have their own right to do that. Like it's their decision. I don't want to infringe on the liberty of someone. But when we're talking, like we talk about context, like the context of feeling like that's the way out or feeling like that's the direction that you have to go is in the moment. And then a week later, it could be entirely different.
Yeah. These are a lot of times contextual.
But the consequence is permanent.
Yeah, and that's where you got to ease in. It's funny. It was one of the first couple episodes, but I was talking to Esther Kim, former student of mine, and she mentioned oddly enough, we're talking about student loans and how hefty student loans steer all these other decisions in your life.
Right.
Do you get married? Do you have kids? Do you buy a house? Like, can I afford any of this? I'm still paying for school. Blah blah blah.
Right.
And she talked about how her longtime boyfriend, who I've met a few times, he's a great guy, but I never knew this. Apparently, he is I'm going to mess up the word, an antinatalist. Like he thinks that having kids is morally wrong because now you're stuck with this life that you didn't ask for.
Gotcha.
And sometimes life is very difficult and awful, and your parents put you into the situation. Because there's a guy, I think this past summer, last year maybe, who sued his parents for bringing him into the world against his will, and he's now like living a life of suffering. And I was like, man, this guy's got to read some Buddhism and just like embrace his suffering and just like this part. But that basically came up in that was that he has these questions about every person should get to make certain decisions in their lives, and for him the biggest one is, I didn't choose to be alive. It's like, man, that like...
It's serious. I mean, like, I'm sure he's serious about it.
Yeah. And I mean, and you can have a very thoughtful conversation about it too, but I'm like,
I think
that's a rabbit hole.
It's a rabbit hole, yeah. And there should be a way to redirect that into a rational thing. Like you said, go like adopt, like become a Buddhist monk or something like that.
Yeah, well, or you find a wonderful service where someone can give you great advice on how to pivot. Like DropDeadPremed.com.
Yeah. Wow, great idea. It's definitely. It's the end of the road is almost never the end of the road.
Yeah.
So finding that one person to talk to, or finding that new industry to explore and finding yourself there, like seeing yourself, creating the vision of you being active in there is so important. Right. Yeah. I didn't know about anything. For like a month before I got a job as a consultant, I didn't know anything about consulting. Yeah. And I just talked to my roommate. And that was really it. I was just like, and I talked to one of my good friends who I've known since elementary school, and she did an internship. And I was just like, yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, we can try it out.
Anyway, figure it out.
Yeah. See, that's and sometimes those changes are good. Maybe they're always good as long as you have the right frame of mind. Even a bad decision could be a good one if you respond well. All right, so I got one last actual question. Just popped into my head. The kid was at the trolley problem. And then, I was like, well, we got a guy who's in a field here.
I'm ready.
You got to think about it.
I guess so.
Last regular question that I sort of ask everybody is recommendations. Books, movies, and this could be for learning and education. This could just be pure personal enjoyment. Like, what are a couple of things that you find yourself recommending multiple times, or that you maybe have been really important to you?
Yeah. So several things in media. Well, I'll start out with like how science has shifted into like my professional passion into like a personal passion. So I've held on to microbiology, and I've always been just fascinated with the incredible detail evolution brings, and like how the incredible detail that life brings from a biology perspective. And looking at microorganisms is soothing to me. Like if you're able to, it's just such a weird thing, because in my free time I always think, I should buy like a microscope and like find samples and just like look at them, like do staining and things like that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did in school.
Yeah,
and I've still to this day like never done it, but I like follow the things on Instagram. Like look at that stuff. I'm like, that's cool. So that's like a good personal thing that I see growth. And I know that I've like dipped my toe in it, wading in it now, and I'm just like, okay, when the time comes, when a microscope goes on sale, and I can like put it on something and like hold it somewhere, and then I'll do that. Yeah. So that's something like I look forward to, and I think it's important to like hold on to those small things. Yeah. And that's just one example, but the other thing is.
Actually, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you read "I Contain Multitudes"?
No.
By Ed. I think it's Young. It's like Yong.
I have not.
It's really good. So it's all about I forget the subtitle, but it's basically how you are an ecosystem. Yeah. And so the whole thing, like, and he talks through all this stuff about. I mean, it's incredible. It's really cool, but it talks all about how you're made of all of these other living things, which like I knew, but I'd never really heard someone explain well.
Right.
Yeah, it's "I Contain Multitudes," which is actually a Walt Whitman line from a poem where he's just expressing awe in the universe.
I love that.
But then he writes this whole book about how you literally contain multitudes.
Yeah.
And so what you just described about the interest in like microbiology does the whole thing and does it like within your own body.
Right.
Really cool book.
Yeah.
So
I would pass that on.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm saying I haven't read anything that
No. I just
I segues me into like the next thing is like I don't fool myself by saying that the best way for me to absorb something is by reading about it. I am super excited about reading those kind of things, but I think over the course of like going to school and I just reading so much and absorbing so much, I'm a slow reader as well. So I like to take care, like part of taking care of myself is being gentle on the reading, because like I will feel disappointed if I don't finish something.
Right.
And also the consultant in me is like, if I can just read about it in 5 pages as opposed to 100, then I'll just read it in 5 pages.
This is where if I didn't have audiobooks and a long commute, I would not have recommended.
Okay,
I have time in the car, and I'm a decent listener.
That's perfect. Yeah,
I like reading, but I wouldn't find the time for it otherwise, and so that's been my go-to.
Yeah.
So no judgment here.
No, okay, perfect, great. Yeah, like recommendations. I think the one movie that keeps sticking with me is Cloud Atlas, and it's like an extension. And I've also read the book.
Yeah.
So
isn't that like a massive book though?
It's a huge book.
Yeah.
I recommend the movie. It's it's a 5-page versus a 100-page kind of thing.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't remember. It was
Tom Hanks is great.
Ago. Yeah. I'm pretty
plays
sure
5 different things.
Yeah, I can't remember. I know what you're talking about, but yeah, I remember looking at the book. And like, it's like a suitcase. Like
it is a suitcase, and it's the movie is long as well, but it just better as a consumer. It's like just easier and like more straightforward. Like the movie is in the book, like it just has so much depth to it. And it's all about like layers over time and like how things that happen 400 years ago and 1,000 years in the future tie together.
Right.
And it's just, I think, in that vein of like how detail is so intricate and how small things in one moment can lead to big things in the other. So that comes across in life all the time.
Yeah.
Like I had one conversation with my roommate about consulting, and that turned into what I do every day for up to like 2.5 years now after I graduate college. What I've become more fascinated with is tying that concept into my life and like reflecting and identifying how things have carried forward.
Like big changes sometimes come from little places.
Right.
And you don't know where those places are going to be ahead of time.
Not at all. Yeah. And that was good. Tom Hanks is great.
Do you know, it's not as dense. I don't know if dense is the word, but it's probably not quite as complicated, but it's based on a short story. I forget. I want to say it's Ray Bradbury maybe, but the movie, The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher.
I saw that when I was younger.
Yeah. It's all right.
It scarred me.
Well, yeah. And I was saying that one, it's weird. Like, you got to watch the editor's cut.
Oh yeah,
because the editor's cut is like it's the original ending.
Okay,
and it's really good. Like it's sad, but it's really good. Yeah. And then they did like the test audience thing, and they're like, oh, no one likes it. So in the movie you get like this like happier ending that doesn't entirely make sense, but I think most people, but it's the same kind of like how all these little things can sort of pile up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you think about all the different, for you, say changes that, you've made from who you were in high school to going to college to a transfer to change it, and you could probably, again, if you had enough time, if you had, as you said before, if you had the bandwidth for it, to look at all the possible data points, like how some of those changes probably started as like this one little thing,
small thing, yeah.
It's, I mean, it's cool because that's how life works, but then it's like horrifying if you think too hard about it. Don't think too hard about it.
No,
I'm gonna try not to.
And right there, yeah.
Don't think too hard about it. Yeah.
I think another thing is, or another person is Kurt Vonnegut. I read him for the first time in my senior year at Broad Run.
Yeah.
And
Cat's Cradle?
No, I read Galapagos. No,
okay.
Yeah.
I actually haven't read that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's still, I think it's my favorite Kurt Vonnegut book. But I read a lot of his work after that point, and I've like held on to his sporadic writing style. Mm-hmm. Like that's a way to be successful. Like you don't need to be stuck in like scientific notation or like in like scientific literature and that writing style even to be successful. Like people will like you if you produce something original and like appealing.
Yeah, that's something he actually said is that one of the reasons that he became a successful writer was that he never took a writing class.
Yeah,
like he said, if I had been an English major, I forget. I think he was like
that's awesome.
He was like an engineer pharmacist. It was something undergrad.
He was pharmacist.
It was something like that.
Yeah,
undergrad, and then he got a master's degree in anthropology, for which his thesis was basically half of Cat's Cradle. Like it wasn't even, and in the end, like, he's like one of the great modern writers and all this stuff. And never took a writing class because that meant he never let too many people tell him he was doing it wrong.
Right. Because he's doing everything that he wants to. And he was, I won't say like the first or anything, but he was doing it in such a unique style and such a unique, he was creating such unique content that no one could tell him he was wrong. And like every writer has that to some extent. Like that was like my self-discovery because it was so radical in my mind. And that's kind of like been something transforming and blowing up in my life too. Like my brother's in a punk rock band, and if I was in high school, I probably would have had distaste to that kind of crap. But but I was just in New York, and maybe I moshed a little. I don't know, but it was fun. And it's like just those kind of small things. Being open-minded, being like okay with feeling uncomfortable is also another thing. Like I didn't know what the hell was going on when I was reading like Slaughterhouse-5, and the worst of it was when I tried to like do a presentation on Slaughterhouse-5 and be like, this is what this book is about. And then well, what, like there's a turn like 80% through the book, and it's just like, oh, this is here now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Oh.
yeah, here you go. Classroom of fellow 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
Like,
Let me tell you all about this confusing.
right. I was leading a plot on one thing, and then now there's a new plot, like, and I'm done. Like, so
I'm gonna go sit down now.
right. You're like, you got this. Like, I'm done.
It's good. All right. So
Yeah.
I gotta read Galapagos.
Galapagos
It's been
it's a
recommended
funny
few times,
book.
but I've never read it.
It's
Yeah.
a funny book. Yeah, it's good. And it was like the perfect bridge because it's all about evolution.
Yeah.
Or like there's like evolution twist to it. And
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, cool.
Nice.
As a biology person, like that was awesome.
Yeah.
To
Yeah, I'm trying to
find
think.
out.
I think we probably read in the English class when I taught you. We probably did. I don't remember if we did war novels at the end of the year. I used to do that, but then a couple of 12th grade teachers already taught some of the books that I wanted, so I sort of halfway bailed on it. So we may not have done it, but
I don't think so.
It's a speech by Kurt Vonnegut that he gave shortly after visiting the Galapagos Islands. So he gives this speech while he's writing that book.
Oh, nice.
But he talks about he's at like I forget, St. Paul's Cathedral. It's the biggest cathedral in New York City. I forget the name of the church. And he's an atheist, and he's giving this speech basically about nuclear war and why we should all be a little less worried.
Okay.
And it's this like weird conversational anecdote kind of thing.
Okay.
And he talks about how he met the bishop on the trip to the Galapagos Islands, and he asked him to come and speak.
Right.
He's basically telling everybody like, hey, don't be so worried about this whole nuclear war thing. This dead is dead, and it's just sort of like, it's a little dark, but it's very funny, and it's something like. I try to use that in one other short text by him, even if we can't get to bigger books, because I think as a person, he's a really interesting guy and he's a good writer. But yeah, that sort of perspective of, there are certain things we don't worry about.
Right.
I just can't.
Yeah.
I just can't do it.
Can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. When I moved, I moved from DC in February, and with that change in my life, like I went over on the West Coast. I'm just like, I'm not here anymore. I don't listen to the news on a daily basis anymore. I don't worry about, as a result, I don't worry about the news on a daily basis anymore. I still take charge of being informed and being active and engaged and things like that. But being able to disconnect from something just more broadly is a healthy behavior.
Yeah.
So whether it be nuclear warfare or what Trump tweeted last night.
Yeah, right.
It's one of the two.
We think so much about your First Amendment, what I send out. Like,
right.
I think we should be thinking just as hard about what we let in.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Conscious decisions.
Well, this has been great.
Yeah. It's time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is no reflection on you because I really want to ask you weird bioethics questions right now.
We can do it another time.
Yeah, we'll do it another time. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So the website is
Drop Dead Premed.
dropdeadpremed.com.
That's right.
And you are mostly up and running. It's on its way.
On its way. Yeah, I can definitely be reached through that website. The website will be changing actively as we learn more about what people want. So it's definitely a active working document, I guess.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, but
a living text.
A living text. Yeah. And the whole point of it is to know and learn from the people who have been there and transfer that into the people who are there. Like whether that's at the beginning, middle, or end. There's always a question that needs to be asked, and if you don't have that person to ask it to, then you're dead in the water. We really just want to be available as a resource and accessible more than anything. There's not one thing that we are specifically focused on doing. We are a dynamic and flexible resource.
Nice. There you go. I love it. And I would like to do this again at some point, and if we do, it'll get weirder because I'm gonna think up all of the weirdest bioethics stuff since I now have you're the closest thing I have to an expert.
No.
So
biggest disclaimer: if there can be a practical application, I will appreciate it a lot.
All right.
So I convinced my philosophy professor to works more in the practical. I asked him about placebos and the ethical connotations with use of placebos. So that was a fun one.
Okay.
But I was tired of answering like Kantian perspectives on things and things like that.
I mean, that's a good perspective, but it's not always the easiest way to find your answer.
Right.
All right. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk.
And I wish you all the best of luck with Drop Dead Premed.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, hope so.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.